Good morning. I'm Eric Lenask with TMC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our morning coffee and webinar. You are on your own for coffee, but we do have what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion centering around how mobility is changing today's workforce. Why? Really, it's simple. When it comes to communications and access, mobile first is the only way to describe today's communications, whether you're talking about business or personal lives. We're all attached to our mobile devices, and in fact, the forward-looking process-driven business has, or at least is considering adding a mobility element to its corporate communications strategy technology. It's really a result of more than some 3.5 billion people having internet access via mobile devices today, and somewhere a little more than a year ago, we actually passed the tipping point where mobile users exceeded fixed internet users. The mobile device has become the first choice for communications for most of them. And really for many of them, the only choice, as we're seeing a growing population, which is ditching their landlines entirely. So this mobile-first mentality is naturally also carrying over into the business world. Or I think it's more appropriate to say that it has carried over. So what does this change mean for businesses? If you ask me, the smart business leader is going to see mobility as an opportunity. Sure, there can be some challenges with implementation and design, but it really should be an opportunity to enhance processes, to increase productivity, to create new revenue potential, and to build both employee and user and customer satisfaction and loyalty. The question is how? And that's part of what we're here to talk about today with Mitel's Ryan Smith. He's going to talk about terms like BYOD and cloud and others, unified communications, all terms that are being thrown around in conversations constantly, and for good reason. I mean, adoption of cloud-based communications continues to grow and even expand into the upper ends of the market as executives and business leaders seek to leverage all of those well-documented benefits and to increase revenue-generating opportunities. But that aside, I've found anecdotally that there tends to still be a lot of confusion around what cloud and what BYOD actually mean for businesses, and secondarily, how businesses can plan for and get the most out of those trends as they adapt their businesses and their communication strategies in today's mobile-first, cloud-enabled world. So Ryan is here to help clear up some of that confusion and to explain those trends that are driving mobility and how cloud and BYOD and other elements play into those trends, and of course, how to get started formulating strategies and for leveraging these trends and building towards successful implementations. Before I hand over today's session to Ryan, just a couple of quick programming notes. First, I encourage you all to use the interface on your screens to submit any questions you may have of Ryan. We have a live Q&A session built in to the end of today's session. If you need to revisit some of today's content, or if you have colleagues that may not have been able to join us today, contact information as well as details on accessing the on-demand version of today's event will be in your inboxes tomorrow. And last but not least, thank you all in advance for taking just a few moments to respond to a few poll questions that we've placed in throughout today's webinar. Hopefully your answers will help Ryan understand where you as our audience stands with regard to mobile strategy and tailor his comments more directly to your needs. And honestly, one last thing, today is actually an ideal time for us to be talking to Ryan. This morning, Mitel actually announced that it has crossed the 2 million cloud subscriber threshold. So congratulations, Ryan and Mitel, on that announcement. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Ryan.
Thank you so much. And, I'm really excited about that news. So this has been, a really exciting time for us as we watch the ticker, if you will, tick up to that 2 million mark and then beyond. So, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you all for joining me today so that we can talk about how mobility is changing the workforce. And so, what we can do is I'd like to talk to you about how mobility is changing the workforce. This is my speaker slide. So this is me. This is what I look like. And some people were talking to me about the fact that I have 3 pictures, and so it's because I have lots of Twitter accounts. So you may run into me on Twitter in many different forms. Of course, the one with the jacket on is the one where I speak on the webinars. The one with the black T-shirt is my UFC Twitter. So I manage multiple Twitter accounts. Reach out to me or follow me if you have any questions outside of the webinar. But without further ado, I'd like to get into today's topics. And so we're going to look at the trends that are influencing the business environment and discuss how IT managers can help their organizations achieve their goals by enabling their workforce greater freedom to work whenever, however, and wherever they want. And finally, we're going to talk about how cloud makes all of this possible and what options you have to make this a reality. So, I think it's probably a bit cliche to talk about how ubiquitous high-speed cellular networks and smartphones are and how it's ushered in this new age of information for us. I think we all get that. But, as consumers, we now have this 24-hour access to the Internet, and everything we want to do under the sun has a dedicated application. Our mobile device has replaced my need for a camera, for a calculator, a portable gaming system, a credit card, an MP3 player, a DVD player, and by the way, it's also a phone, right? So it's the first thing I look at in the morning and the last thing I look at before I fall asleep. And so I'm sure that this resonates with all of you, that the mobile phone has become something that is part of who we are. You see, the singular importance that we as consumers place on this one device underscores how mobility drives the way we interact with the digital world. We now look for dining options as we're en route to the restaurant. And we share photos of the meal at dinner, and then we review our experience at that restaurant on our way home. So in this regards, we've never been more mobile. But let's look at some of the statistics that are driving that. And, when you consider the fact that a third of the world was born between 1980 and 2000, these people we call millennials are hyper-connected. They grew up with the Internet. They have a mobile device embedded in their hands, and they have no idea what a rotary dial phone is. You see, here in the U.S., they are the largest population in our workforce. And if you're not a millennial, look around, because they are our workforce of tomorrow, and the mobile device is a key part of their lives. So here's something that we found interesting, is that in a recent study that we conducted, we learned that for small to medium businesses under 500 employees, 40% of the IT decision makers are already millennials. So their impact is being felt today, and with this statistic, it's only standing to grow. So it looks like we've got a poll here.
Excellent, thanks, Ryan. So Ryan started talking a little bit about mobile strategy. What we'd like to know is what type of mobile access do you provide to company resources for your employees currently? VPN only, cloud-based access, none, or you don't currently provide access because of potential security risks. Ryan, I can't imagine that none is a growing number. That's got to be getting close to zero at this point, right?
Yeah. I would be surprised to see something statistically significant at the none. I think we may see some, with regards to still people having concerns around security risks. So we may see some there. I'm suspecting that we may see a lot around VPN only, just because that is one way to provide remote access and address some of the security risk. And then, of course, the cloud-based is really where a lot of people are going.
Are we seeing the kind of growth regarding cloud-based remote access as we are with other cloud-based resources?
I think we are, because as more people get accustomed to using cloud technologies, it's definitely something that people are beginning to request and demand and ask, why can't we do it this way? And one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on is how our experiences in our personal lives begin to influence what we expect in our professional lives.
Excellent. Why don't we let's take a look at what our audience has to say, and a little bit interesting. None outweighs the people who don't.
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised to see that. I was thinking that it would at least be the other way around, but VPN only does lead the day, and so I think that will always be something that people will continue to have, but as we having to keep track of that key and all of those passwords and things like that that you have to do in order to access that VPN, I think will begin to create an opportunity for cloud-based solutions.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. So as the reason why we wanted to ask that question is because of this slide, is that 70% of mobile professionals will conduct business on personal mobile devices by 2018. You see, right now I carry a business phone and a business laptop and a personal phone, a personal laptop, and a computer. All of these things have access to work. Now, why would I do that? It's because I want to be able to access my email and work resources whenever I need it. And this is something that's going to be you're going to hear me say this over and over again, whenever I need it, wherever I am, because that is what the work is that I do requires of me. And I think that that's something that we're going to find is as time goes on, those are going to be the expectations that the business will ask, our IT leadership to facilitate for us. And so regardless of what device I'm on, I want to be able to respond to a request. Now, you guys are probably not a weirdo like me carrying 5 devices everywhere you go, but more and more people have access to work on their personal machines. So as we begin to move on, we begin to think about this stat as people working in non-office environments, that 75% of the U.S. workforce is mobile. These are non-working environments. So think about how the impact and mobility affords us has changed the way we do business. So for those of you who have IT careers that extend, shortly after the turn of the century in 2000, we started realizing how desktops kept us from responding to requests that came in, right? So at that time, having to take notes on paper and pencil in a meeting and then transcribing it to our computer and then sending emails and doing work was extremely inefficient. Laptops were exceptions to IT policy, and they were only allocated to senior leadership. And now, a short time later, the overwhelming majority of us are mobile. And as a result of that, that's created a need for applications that consider the screen size people are using. You see, more applications are web-based, and they have a dedicated application that you can install on your tablet or your smartphone to have access whenever or wherever you need it. Now, whether you're using Salesforce or Microsoft Excel, there's now an app so that you can work on smaller screens. You see, as IT managers, now you've got to plan for smaller devices because they just happen to be so pervasive. And the fact that they are so pervasive brings us to this reality. The PC is becoming an afterthought. As we look at the mobility scoreboard, the PC, which back in the early 2000s was the device of choice, is going the way of the fax machine. If you want one, you've got to work hard to get access to one. And so that's something else that's created this need for what we're going to talk about here shortly, which is bring your own device, or the BYOD. Because when we look back at that time, often standard IT issue equipment weren't as technologically advanced, didn't have the operating systems and the computing capabilities that we had at home. And so we begin to ask the question of why are we still on Windows 98 when it's now Windows 2000 or the next operating system? Why are we still using Office 97 whenever Office 2003 or 2010 happens to be out? This Intel study showed that 50% of IT managers strongly agree that bring your own device has a positive impact on worker output. So one of the things that we'll talk about later on in the presentation as well is the consumerization of IT. But the fact is, think about it like this. If you're a Mac person and the company standard is PC, having to switch your brain has a significant impact on productivity and probably an increase in the debate on why Apple is better than PC or PC is better than Apple. And that's the reality that it is. So I'm really interested in finding out from you guys, do you have your own BYOD? So here's our next survey question.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan. And folks, thank you again for taking a couple of moments here. Quick little yes or no. There are some challenges, obviously, with implementing BYOD strategy. But that aside, Ryan, I've heard anecdotally some companies kind of going back away from BYOD toward corporate-owned. Is that a misconceived notion, or is there any kind of a move in that direction?
I think of it as kind of a pendulum that swings one way and then the other. And so I think that there's a happy medium where there is the CYOD, which we don't talk about in this presentation, but it's the choose your own device. So it's corporate owned, but it's the consumer electronics that we're familiar with. So instead of it being the company issued BlackBerry device, you've got a choice of an Android phone or an iPhone. I carry my personal phone is an iPhone. My company issue phone is an Android. So there's this hybrid strategy that also exists, and maybe we could have asked if we had this choose your own device as a third option here.
Excellent, makes sense. Let's take a look at what our audience is telling us. Interesting.
Wow. That's really interesting. So it's about 50-50. I'd love to see this. I would have loved to have seen this a year ago, and I'd love to see this next year, just to see how those numbers are switching. Because I do think that there's some people who may be scaling back from the BYOD policy. But we're going to talk a little bit about why cloud is enabling people to be device agnostic, to it not matter anymore. All right, so let's talk. We talked a little bit about the trends that that's kind of pushing that mobility and that desire to work anywhere, anytime, and however we want to work on whatever device we want to work. But what are we hearing in the market from business owners, from IT leaders? As we've seen those statistics, let's talk about what people are saying about what they need. And this is the first one, that work is an activity, not a location. And this is a common one we hear from business owners. You see, if you're leading a growing business, you don't work the standard 8 to 5 day. You're lucky if you're able to sleep from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. More than likely, you're on the phone or on the computer or both at dinner, in the bed, and in transit. That work, for leaders of growing businesses is almost an all-consuming experience that everything else revolves around. The next thing that we've heard is how technology should help drive simplicity. And then the way I like to think about this is that technology should drive efficiency, that things should be easier and faster as a result of making a new investment in technology. Now, one thing that you may not know about me is that I spent my first 6 years of my career in IT. I started off working with desk side support technicians. I also did application development and things like that. And so I'm acutely aware of the struggles that IT leadership has with regards to budgets and how that budget often gets stripped from your hands when you need it most. So whenever you're able to sell investing in a new technology, that things should be made easier and faster as a result. There should be a competitive advantage that you can show as a result of spending that budget on something new. Often, however, that integration becomes a challenge that IT managers and IT professionals have to constantly address. Think about bringing on a new solution and the impact that it has when something like single sign-on isn't part of that solution. Simplicity goes out of the window, and password reset calls are set to increase. And finally, growing businesses want to be able to think big but act small. That is to say to look larger than you are, but to retain the agility and flexibility that large companies failed to achieve. We talk about turning that oil tanker. Small businesses, can react and move much faster. So simplicity and efficiency isn't the only thing that's important to business. It's also about how technology delivers the capabilities to present that growing business as a reliable, credible organization that appears to be able to exist long into the future. One of the things that I do is I consult with entrepreneurs, and one of the first things I tell them is to buy a .com domain. .net is nice, but .com is preferred. Why? It's not just because a web presence is important, because it is, but what's more important is what goes on the business card. If you think about robslawn@gmail.com versus rob@robslawn.com, those two email addresses communicate very different things. You see, small businesses that have communication solution that comes with CRM integration or that deliver anywhere, anytime access to company resources are able to communicate that bigger field to customers. So, maybe you're thinking, so what, right? There is one thing that mobility and ubiquitous access has done for us as a people. But before we talk about that, I think we've got another poll.
Yeah, now we're kind of interested in knowing how much or how often do you actually conduct business away from your desk? And Ryan, first and foremost, if I had to guess, I would imagine this number is going to be pretty high. Kind of, I look at these questions as almost as very infrequently, occasionally, regularly, and all the time, as sort of the four answer categories. And I think that greater than 50% number is. I expect it to be pretty high.
Yeah, I would expect so. So often we talk about being mobile as working outside of the physical building, but being mobile is working away from your desk, away from that tethered Ethernet cable, and working in the break room or in a conference room or down in the lobby somewhere. It doesn't have to necessarily be at the mall or in your car or at the airport.
Very good point, and I did notice the language in the question being away from your desk, and certainly we're seeing a lot more focus on the wireless infrastructure within enterprises, focusing exactly on enabling that kind of in-building mobility. Let's take a look at what our audience says. Wow,
it's a very interesting distribution. I'm I'm pretty impressed by how how I was thinking that it might be greater than 50%, walking away, but we see this a very nice distribution here.
I imagine it tends to vary based on role or function within a business as well.
Absolutely. So, the question that I asked before, but before going into the poll was, what impact does the trends that we talked about and what we're hearing from, IT managers and business owners, what does that all culminate to? And that is that we've become free-range humans. We are now limitless. There's so much that we can do now that we're untethered. I'm reminded of Pinocchio's famous song, "I've got no strings to hold me down." So I want you to look closely at this photo. What do you see? What you see on this photo is actually my manager in yellow standing at the peak. What do you think he's just finished doing? If you guessed speaking on a conference call, then you're right. But many of you probably thought climbing a mountain, which is fair because it's him on top of a mountain. But he's just finished a conference call, which is why the picture was taken, because that's pretty impressive. That's what mobility has ultimately allowed us to do. It's allowed us to be free. That if you think about Southwest Airlines and how they've given us the freedom to move about the country, these devices have given us the freedom to work at soccer practice, at the airport, or like my manager on Camelback Mountain. So what's the driving force behind this newfound freedom? Well, it's the changing market. This is my obligatory market is changing slide. It seems like, if we're going to do these types of talks, we've got to say that the market is changing, and it is. It's ever changing. I've updated that saying that says the only thing that's certain is death and taxes. It now also includes changing markets. But let's look at these for each. Let's look at each of these for just a moment. The first one is cloud. As we look at the public, private, and hybrid implementations of cloud, it has given us the ability to access resources on any device without needing something like VPN to be able to do that. And it's something that we have all gotten used to. If you've got a Gmail account or some type of access to software as a service, then you definitely understand how access with a username and password in a multi-tenant environment is something that is becoming more and more common because of the fact that it allows us access anywhere we have an internet connection. The second thing is about unified communications. And with regard to that is the increased ability to collaborate. One of the things that I'm working on is I'm actually working on a blog that will be published sometime this month around how collaboration makes us human. If you look around and you think about all the things that we take for granted with regards to our society and how we're able to create these megalithic cities that sprawl all over the country, it's because of our ability to collaborate, retain information, to teach each other new ways of doing things. And that comes with technologies that allow us to communicate and connect. We've already really touched on mobility and how it gives us this new level of connectivity. So I won't spend a lot of time there because I'm really excited about talking about IT consumerization. If you think back to what I was talking about before with regards to how IT policy and the standard issue desktop often lagged behind the technology we had at our home, workers began to demand new ways, better computers, new things that allowed us to have that personal at-home experience at work. And what we're seeing is now that those PCs have given way to laptops, and now laptops have given way to tablets and smartphones, that the request and the expectation of how we do our work is driven by how we live our lives. Look at how how applications now tend to begin to look like Facebook, online. That applications now have an app on your phone, just like just like Angry Birds or something like that. That now the device, as we talked about before, the mobile device has to be considered. Finally, customer interaction, and this is something that pairs with the IT consumerization, is that when you begin to think about how your business begins to interact with customers, it has to be prepared to address all the ways that they communicate. That means, 10 years ago, you didn't need a social media expert to watch Twitter in case someone complained about your business on Twitter. That the expectations around chat, around instant messaging, not instant messaging, but text messaging, SMS, those types of things, with how consumers begin to communicate with your business, now have to be considered today that weren't before. And so mobility and cloud technologies are the things that are powering that. So the question is, what's the impact? And I think that the impact has to do with the fundamental change in the way that we do business. And I think that this image is telling about how we organize our lives today. That when we go to work, it's no longer that wall-to-wall cube type experience. That there are more collaborative environments where we can sit down and face each other in something that's not as formal as a conference room or business environment. And these are all things that are facilitated by mobility. Here are some other things to think about and consider. 2/3 of employers report increased productivity among remote workers. Now, I think a lot of people may think about the fact that when you work from home, you often say that you get more done when you work at home than you do in the office. And why is that? Because when you're remote, you're able to get away. And that reduces the amount of distractions that you have, and that increases the amount of time that you can piece together to get one thing done. And so that's what this new mobility has allowed us and is powering us to be able to do. For those of you in small to medium businesses, this is a statistic that is very telling, that 16% of communications are delayed because the team could not reach the decision maker. This goes back to that idea and that concept of unified communications and collaboration. One of the things for growing businesses, small to medium businesses, that we don't often think about is the fact that while collaboration between two employees is great, that the employee's ability to reach you, the IT decision maker, the IT manager, or the business owner, whenever there's a pressing question, whenever there's a customer that is, that has a problem, or you're getting ready to close this deal, but you just need one last person to sign off on it, the ability to reach that person becomes critical. And the ability that mobility and cloud technologies have to reduce that response latency is tremendous, and it's one of the things that's driving the way that we're looking at technology today. One other thing I'd like to talk about before we get into our final poll is the fact that 75% of remote workers continue working in the event of a disaster. And this is all around business continuity. Now, I live in Dallas, and from time to time during the winter, we have this thing called winter, and snow comes down and ice freezes everything. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a tornado, which we are sometimes known for. It can be just the fact that ice freezes on the roads, and we as Texans are not used to driving on anything like that. And so we all stay in and things shut down. But we don't have to stop working. Because of mobility, because of the ability to work anywhere, anytime, we now can continue working without being in the office. So it begins to ask the question of why do we still need the office? But before we ask that question, because I have an interesting slide for you there's another poll that we have for you.
And thank you again, Ryan. So this time we would like to know what percentage of your employee population works remotely. Again, Ryan, this is a number that is clearly been on the rise, for several years now, as people start to leverage mobility, the cloud, all the things that you've talked about, and kind of realize that they don't have to be so geographically focused when it comes to hiring practices, and can really expand where they're looking to employ people from.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, is that when you're looking at hiring the best and brightest talent, location doesn't necessarily matter anymore. That whenever you've got this ubiquitous access to company resources, then now you find the best person for the job. You don't find the best person that's closest to the office. So I'm looking at this. I'm thinking that we're probably going to see a large spike around 11 to 25%. So we'll see. We'll see if I'm surprised or not.
Well, why don't we take a look at what our audience has told us?
I was close. I was second.
A little bit surprising, though, isn't that 0 to 10 is the highest figure? Yeah,
as we're looking at I think maybe what we're thinking about also we should think about is the fact that depending on the size of the business, there may not be satellite offices. So having everybody in one location, may be the way that it goes. If we think back to how we were talking about before with the poll around VPN and access to remote, we saw that there was a bit of a surprise with VPN and then none, and so that may have given us an indication that a lot of people work in the office, and so there isn't necessarily a need for providing significant remote access. Okay, so before we got into the poll, I was saying, why is there, do we need the office? If we've got all this wonderful technology that allows us access to company resources, and we can work even if there is some type of disaster or this thing called winter in Texas, what is the result of that? And this is one that I thought was really interesting, that employers can save an average of $10,000 per employee per year in real estate costs for full-time remote workers. And so that is a significant number. And so we begin to think about how IT investment becomes critical whenever budgets are constrained. This begins to become a project where, as we begin to allow people the freedom to work wherever they want, we can begin to save money on real estate by allowing them to work from home or to work from another office. This idea of hot desk availability. So when someone needs to come in and work in the office for the day, they can, but it's no longer a requirement. It's no longer an expectation. And so the savings is tremendous when we begin to think about, where can we reinvest that? Can we reinvest that in talent? Can we reinvest that into IT projects that build efficiency and simplicity instead of maintaining a desk? And then finally, to get back to the BYOD, by 2017, 50% of companies will allow employees to supply their own devices for work. I think that goes to say that as we get more and more accustomed to using our device, that's going to be the expectation. That's going to be what we're asking for, is, can I use this device? Do you allow Androids in an iPhone workshop, iPhone workplace? Do you have an iPhone in an Android workplace? Currently, I'm in a place that's predominantly Android, and so I carried an iPhone, since the iPhone 3G came out, and so I got my very first Android, and there was a learning curve. And so when we begin to think about just as soon as next year, half of companies will be allowing employees to use the devices they feel most comfortable on. That time spent on a learning curve goes away, and it just gets right down to productivity. So now I want to talk a little bit about how all of this is possible. And this is my favorite topic. This is my thing that I love to talk about, of course, because I'm a cloud guy, is the cloud. Because what powers all of that is the fact that no longer do you need a separate username and password to VPN into company resources, because the cloud is everywhere. As long as you have an internet connection, you can get in to access your resources securely and continue working. So let's talk about that. Regardless of where the cloud journey begins or ends, there is a path to the cloud that can happen at your own pace. So it doesn't matter if you're partially in the cloud or if you've not even investigated the cloud, that wherever you are, there's a pathway to it. So whether you go straight from having all of your technology, your phone and communication solutions on-premise, and going straight to a mobile cloud solution where you can do everything, which is a pretty significant forklift. Or if you want to go it in stages, if you're a small to medium business and you're growing, then maybe if all you need to do is make sure people are connected and that they have access to their resources, then a public cloud solution might be the best for you. As you begin to grow, there may be some resources that you want to take out of the public cloud and move it in-house. And when you do that, then you now have a private cloud with some public cloud components. That begins to move you into the hybrid implementations. And so when you begin to do that, there's some benefits that I think are very telling. First of all is the financial savings. So you begin to move away from these huge needs for outlays of CapEx dollars down to OpEx dollars, that it becomes a plannable monthly charge that you get every month that you can plan for, and it's consistent. There are no surprises. The second one is around implementation time. The ability to get the solution up quickly becomes something that is an advantage to the business. So if in your business case you're talking to the leadership team and you're saying that going to a cloud communication solution, for instance, is something that will save us money on real estate, will save us from lower our budget and our need to allocate resources to keep up the existing phone system, we can also do that. We can also implement that in days, not weeks or months. Then that becomes a strategic advantage that is an easy decision to make. And then finally, a concept of geo-redundancy. So for those of you who who are all in one site, what happens if you're in Tornado Alley like things are in Dallas? What happens when a tornado lands on the business? How do you keep things going? Are your employees remote? Can they work in the event of a disaster? A lot of companies have backup, but the concept of geo-redundancy around it doesn't matter where your data center is, because we've got one on one coast and one on the other coast. If there's a disaster in one place, then everything fails over, and it's seamless, that you never stop. I like to think of it as being unsinkable. And so the benefit around how much money you can save by moving to the cloud, the time in which you can get up and going, and the resiliency and redundancy that a solution can deliver to you becomes a wonderful message to communicate to the larger business. And so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about companies that can deliver cloud communication solutions for you, and that's the company I work for is Mitel. One of the things that we talked about today, and instantly my slide has been rendered obsolete because we are now over the 2 million mark. So, but we operate in over 100 countries, and we're the fastest growing cloud communications provider today. We now have over 2 million cloud subscribers, and that represents now over, or at least nearly 25% of the global cloud market. So with regards to cloud, it's something that we understand and that we've been working with businesses, small to medium business, all the way up to enterprise level businesses around how we begin to provide them the ability to ensure that their businesses and their employees can work whenever, however they want. And so if you'd like to know more about that or what's coming up next, we've got another webinar coming up on April 6th, and it's talking about Cloud X.0. This is the true experience. This is what we're hearing is the second of 3 webinars. This is the final culmination of what you should expect if you're moving to a cloud-enabled environment. What you should expect from your cloud provider. And so things that we're going to talk about is why today's technology fails to deliver that experience. We're going to talk about what you should expect and what you should receive from your cloud communications provider now and in the future. And then finally, how consumer expectations have changed the workforce. And we touched a little bit on that today, but we're going to go much more in depth in that webinar. So I hope that if you've enjoyed this talk, I hope that you'll join us for the last and final episode of this 3 webinar series. So with that, Eric, I'll send it back to you.
Hey, Ryan, thank you very much. Some fantastic insight and detail there. As I mentioned at the outset, we've set aside some time for your questions and to have Ryan answer some of those. So we're going to jump right into those in just one second. Again, just one quick reminder that you'll all be receiving some follow-up detail with contact information and access to the archived version of today's webinar in your inboxes tomorrow. But with that, let's get to some of these questions. So Ryan, I mentioned at the outset, there's at least some sentiment that migrating to a mobility system can be complicated. Is that the case, or does it have to be that way?
It doesn't have to be that way. One of the things that when you're migrating over to cloud, it goes back to that at your own pace type of idea, where depending on where you are and where you want to go, there is a path to get there. And so if you're on a legacy system that's been, that's on-premise and you want to move to a cloud solution, there are ways to be able to get you in phases from point A to point B. So, back when cloud started really kicking off and virtualization started kicking off in 2008, which is when Mitel really started getting involved, there weren't the resources and knowledge that's available that is today on the various ways on how to move from an on-premises solution to a hybrid solution or to a purely public solution or any stage in between. So it's no longer that difficult, scary thing. It's literally can be done at your pace, how you want to do it.
So with that, kind of a parallel question to that, there's certainly plenty of other cloud-based vendors out there, and there are folks out there who have had negative experiences, maybe either getting a cloud-based system implemented or getting users added onto that cloud platform, how it may not have been as simple as they were initially let out to believe. What are some of the things that can be done to help simplify that, getting those users onto a cloud system?
Well, I think probably the first thing is, one of the first considerations that we talk about is, going back to how quickly do you want to get there. But once we figure out that pathway to where you'd like to go, it becomes an issue of, all right, what is it that you have to deliver versus what other providers ask you to deliver? One of the things that, at least at Mitel, that we pride ourselves on is being able to have that end-to-end solution that takes care of all of your needs. So with regards to being, we didn't touch on it very much today, but being mobile first. So that instantly takes care of any questions around conversations around desk phones and things like that, because we're mobile first. And we've shown a lot of evidence around how people prefer and choose, and you even shared some statistics around how mobile devices are our primary choice of communication device worldwide. What that goes to show is that it becomes simpler whenever you architect your cloud communication solution around the mobile device instead of the desktop. When we start talking about things like number porting and how easy it is to get your number that you have today over into the new system, those are considerations that IT leaders have to think about, that a cloud provider like Mitel takes care of for you. And so one of the things that we've definitely been working on is for those people who are migrating, how quickly can we do it? How seamlessly can we make it? And finally, how do we put that migration process in your hands so that it's not us that you have to wait on? You can do it yourself, simply and easily.
So I guess we can't get away without answering a question about data security, and specifically, how can businesses keep data secure if everybody's got their own devices? And I guess how does say a CYOD policy compare to a BYOD policy in a case like that?
Okay, well, I can definitely understand the concern, and that's one reason why, a BYOD policy, when you have VPN, means that the data can easily be stored on the person's personal device. But when you're in a cloud environment, where is the data stored? You can access the data, and yeah, we can get into the kind of the minutia of whether or not you can download the data to your computer and things like that. But the data is stored in the cloud, so you can provide access to it, and you can limit the amount of data that actually gets down to the machine. So what's great about that is that now any device can become a work machine, while keeping the security and the integrity of company assets protected. So that's really the benefit of the cloud, is that you can ensure the security, ignore the device, because the information is stored in the cloud. When you compare that to a CYOD, then that becomes something where I really like these hybrid type situations, so that a CYOD lets the consumer, or not the consumer, but the employee have a device that they're accustomed to, which shortens or flattens the learning curve, while the company keeps control of not only the data that's in the cloud, but also how that device is used. So, ultimately, BYOD is probably the least expensive with regards to the cloud, while retaining security. If you're really a stickler on security, then maybe a CYOD is the better way to go. But the cloud becomes the key component in ensuring that data stays secure in the company assets and not on employees.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Have one question here, maybe a little bit of confusion that you can help alleviate. Mitel is known as a communications provider. How does the Mitel Cloud address communications?
So that's actually a really good question. We address communications by really looking at three components, and this has become the mantra within our office, that we are mobile first, cloud enabled, and millennial focused. So what does that really mean? When we talked about before being mobile first, it's undeniable that the one device that we rely on, that we're willing to turn around in a 30-minute trip, we're willing to turn around more than halfway to go back and get our mobile device and not our ID or our wallet. And so we begin to look at how we can maximize communication on that device. And so that, I think, what sets us apart as a communications provider is because we believe that the mobile device is the one device that you should be as effective on as if you were at your desk. So no matter where you are, that mobile device is important. We've talked a little bit about how cloud enabled makes everything tick. That the fact that the data is in the cloud is what makes it makes it all kind of work, and it makes that mobile device even more powerful. And then finally, millennial focus. We talked about how the changing workforce and how IT consumerization and expectations around how those things are used are really guiding how we organize our workforce. But in addition to just communication on a mobile device, we should also think about how Mitel looks at collaboration. Because when we start talking about collaboration, there's a fundamental flaw in the way that collaboration has been thought of and done in the past. There's a separate application that you log into that's disconnected from your mobile device. Whereas what we think about is when you talk about communication, you can't have communication, you can't connect with someone if you don't have the means to be able to collaborate with them wherever you are, anytime and anywhere. So for that person who asked that question, that's the fundamental difference that we have when we talk about the way Mitel sees communication and the way that other vendors look at communication, where they start with the age-old, turn-of-the-century desktop phone, and there's lamps and you check presence there. Everything is mobile, and we should design our communication solution to follow the way you live your life.
Great. You talked about geo-redundancy at one point. Obviously a lot of businesses have their own backup systems. What's the relationship between enterprises' own backup systems and your geo-redundancy? What's the benefit for folks that already have their own backup systems? And with your geo-redundancy, do enterprises even need their own backups?
So, I think that one of the things that we would talk about is businesses who have backups. You may back up your data have some type of data backup solution. When we talk about geo-redundancy, we're talking about ensuring resiliency for your communication solution. So not necessarily, backing up files per se, but it's ensuring that when you pick up the phone or you hit send on a message, that communication solution is there, ready and waiting for you to deliver. And so one of the things is whether or not you're in a data center, often that data center is a singular data center that it's maybe local to you, or in a data center, perhaps you're using something like Azure or Amazon Web Services or something like that. But when we talk about geo-redundancy, we're talking about having our Tier 4 data centers. So these are the highest rated data centers with 5 nines availability on opposing coasts, so that it's always going to deliver you a dial tone, if you will, regardless of whether or not you have something that happens in Florida, like a hurricane or something, that maybe it disables the data center in one area. You can still come back to let's say on the West Coast in maybe Seattle or in Washington. There's still the functionality is still there. So when we talk about geo-redundancy, we're talking about large-scale delivering, carrier class availability to your business, as opposed to backups that that for files and things like that.
Great. Excellent, Ryan. That actually does take us to the end of the time that we have for today's Q&A. For any questions that you've sent in, they've all been archived. I know that Ryan and the team over at Mitel will get back to you offline to answer any remaining questions or outstanding questions. And, of course, if you do have additional questions or would like more information about Mitel Cloud or any of the other Mitel products, you'll also be receiving contact information in those emails that I mentioned previously. I want to thank Ryan as well as the whole team over at Mitel for putting on today's event. And, of course, thank you to everybody in our audience for joining us this morning. Hope it was useful, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Good morning. I'm Eric Lanask with TMC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our morning coffee and webinar. You are on your own for coffee, but we do have what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion centering around how mobility is changing today's workforce. Why? Really, it's simple. When it comes to communications and